Okay, hello everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. We're very fortunate today to have our first Barron County colleague speaking in the forum series, so that's an exciting advance for us. So Sue Patrick from UW-Eau Claire-Barron County is who I discovered has been in the system since longer than me, 1990. We're very happy to have her here, and she's going to talk to us about the Depression in Rice Lake.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So hello to all of you, and thank you for coming. And I just wanted to start with a little bit of background on this paper, this work. It's part of a larger study of the 1930s in northwestern Wisconsin. I'm focusing on 10 counties that do not include Chippewa or Eau Claire. Right now I've been focusing on reading the pages of the Rice Lake Chronotype, which is a weekly newspaper that came out from the 1880s onward. It's still being published. I presented a version of this at the Northern Great Plains History Conference this past September in Mankato, and I'm going to be presenting a version of it in Washington, D.C. at the Agricultural History Conference in June. And so I thought I would love to take advantage of this opportunity to run it by people who don't necessarily know as much about this topic as some of the others would from those venues. Also, because of the feedback that I got in September, I broadened the scope of what I was doing a little bit. It helped that I have 30 minutes here because I only had 15 in September. And so I've added a little bit more data based on the suggestions that I received at that time. So in terms of my methodology, I started by creating an Excel spreadsheet. And at that point, I was focused on 1930 to 1932. There were 16 grocers in Rice Lake in 1930, and I put a tab for each one of them on this Excel spreadsheet. And then I put in literally everything that they were advertising. And that ended up with a set of data that was way too big for me to manage. And as a result, I cut it down to just 4 things for the presentation in September and 5 things for this one. And just looked primarily at the stores that are carrying, or advertising, I should say. I suppose they're always carrying these goods, but they're advertising these particular goods more frequently than others are. So originally I had Gold Medal Flour, Hills Brothers Coffee, Proctor and Gamble White Naphtha Soap, and Beef Roast. And then I added Van Camp's Pork and Beans. I'm going with, primarily, other than the Beef Roast, going with name brands because of the comparability in terms of quality, rather than relying on, is Echo canned corn the same as somebody else's Circle B canned corn, kind of vagueness in my comparisons. So generally speaking, advertising is about optimism. You're trying to convince the customers that they can get the great stuff that they want at the great prices at your place. And in the early 1930s, that context was pretty hazardous because the economy is declining. This is Federal Reserve data that I added after the September presentation. Both unemployment and underemployment are rising. The farm economy is suffering. Businesses had to accept downward pressure on prices and a decline in consumer spending. And so these 2 graphs, the one on the left is the consumer price index for all urban consumers focused on food prices. And the one on the right is the producer price index for all commodities. It's interesting how similar the trajectories are, although there is some difference in the indices. It's nationwide, of course, and it's really difficult for people to just think, well, I'm not making it here, I'll just go someplace else and start a new business, because there's really no place else to go. So it's interesting to look at the newspaper to find out not only what are the price data like, but also to see if I can determine, and I was able to determine to some extent, how the different grocers are responding to the crisis and trying to keep their businesses in operation. Obviously, if there are 16 of you in a city that is approximately between 5,000 and 6,000 people in 1930, that's a lot of competition. In addition, there was one national chain, A&P, and two regional chains, the National Tea Company and Red Owl stores. And then the rest are more mom and pop type of operations, although some of them had come together in a consortium called the Rice Lake Grocer Company, which advertised under the name of home-owned stores. There are about 10 of them, and that allowed them to get scale and be able to order goods from the wholesalers at better prices, and therefore offer them to their consumers at better prices. So when things started to get dicey in 1930 and 1931, looking at the ads, I could tell some of the strategies that they're adopting. One thing is more and more of them are moving to a cash-only basis, which the chains have been using to begin with. That means that they don't have to worry about managing credit accounts that may or may not get paid anytime soon. And then there are also, some of them, not all of them, are offering extended hours or opening on Sundays or opening on some holidays. Some offer free delivery. Almost all of them have delivery services, but some offer free delivery or start offering free delivery. They run special events and special demonstrations to try and drag people in. And occasionally they even advertise beyond the home-owned stores, even advertise with a competitor, as when Northside Grocery and Westside Grocery started to advertise together. So there are a variety of ways in which they're trying to cope. A&P began running feature ads that were aimed at convincing housewives that they should come and shop there. And these appeared on different pages than their ads that actually listed prices for the week. And this is one example, no employment in housekeeping. It's a little hard to read, but basically they're saying that you save on your food if you come here. And it takes less time to shop here because you're going to find what you need. And this is another one of the ones that they are promoting in a separate sort of ad. Essentially, they're saying that there's nothing wrong with them offering quality food at lower prices. And they also defend themselves by saying that their margin is only 2.5 cents on the dollar. A bit later, some of the stores, and this is from home-owned stores, and they're listed down at the very bottom of the ad. They listed the prices on the left for that week, and then on the right for that week a year ago in 1929, before the crash. And this one is from August of 1930. And there were some noticeable declines, but they're not all declines. American pound cheese was down by 10 cents a pound. But some other things are not down nearly so much. So at any rate, this is one. Model Grocery ran its own. Model Grocery is one of the home-owned stores, but it always advertised separately, as well as having its name in the home-owned stores things. And then A&P copied that idea. It must have been happening around the country, not just in Rice Lake, but A&P copied that idea a bit later, and they're showing prices here from late January, 1931. And comparing to a year ago from that. So starting to look at individual products, I'm going to start with Gold Medal flour. It was advertised at the 3 chain stores somewhat regularly, also occasionally advertised by some of the smaller local places. In 1929, the first one of the stores that happened to, that's another A&P, sorry. One of the first stores that happened to mention it was Model Grocery. And it started at 185. And by the end of 1932, had dropped to 117, or actually in June, 117, gone up a bit more in August. In 1933, it went up significantly to $2.05 at the end of September. This is a general trend. This is from the National Tea Company. This company only listed a price for gold medal flour 12 times, but it shows the same general decline. And the low point is in December of 1932 before it starts going up again. And here is the A&P data. So the bottom of the scale, maybe I should put this one first. The bottom of the scale is indicating the total number of dates that I used to plot price changes from 1929 to the end of 1933. And then the scale on the side is indicating the price in dollars and cents. I chose to use the 49-pound sack of gold medal flour as my comparison. Some of them would offer 98-pound sacks, and some of them would offer less than 49, but 49 was the one that was most commonly proposed. And so these prices are generally ranging between $1 and $2.10 for 49 pounds of flour. Okay. Altogether, it's obvious that prices of flour did definitely drop. There's some variation in the percentages. A&P from March of 1930, when it started to advertise, it didn't advertise in 1929, but in 1930, when it started to advertise, the drop from then until the December low was 26%. At National Tea, the drop was 37% from March of 1930 to December of 32, and model groceries from March of 30 to August of 32 was a decline of just over 31%. Oh, and here's Red Owl. I forgot I had that in there. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis, the FRED data. This one has the wholesale price of wheat flour for Minneapolis and shows the wholesale prices were also rising in 1933. So the local grocers are simply reflecting the rather quick rise in flour prices in 1933 compared to what had been happening before. Grocers were actually more likely to advertise house brands of coffee than national brands like Maxwell House or Hills Brothers. But again, because of the quality issues, I thought it would be better to go with the national brands. And just arbitrarily, I chose Hills Brothers over Maxwell House. This particular Red Owl ad has the Hills Brothers coffee sort of in the middle there at 38 cents a pound. And here is the scatter on the same product. It declined from March 19th, 1930, when it was 47 cents a pound, to October of 1932, when it was 35%, and that was just a little over 25%. And then, as it says here, it was down to 31 in March of 1933. A&P first advertised, it was 45 cents, and that was in March of 1930. By April of 31, it was down to 39 cents a pound, and by the end of 1932, it had dropped to 34 cents. Its lowest point was also in 1933, when it was for 31 cents. Northside Grocery only advertised the house brand of coffee after April of 1931. But even though there's limited data there, it does still show the same downward trend. And I was able to find a retail price of coffee in New York City in the FRED data. And it shows that, unlike flour, the price for coffee remained down and even sunk a little lower in New York City, and was at that point going between 25 and 30 cents a pound. So that Rice Lake was just a little higher than that is hardly surprising. Then the third thing I looked at was Kellogg's Corn Flakes. I decided I needed some processed products as well as the more straightforward ones. They were usually sold in 17-ounce packages or boxes, and usually they were advertised as 2 for a particular price. along with the chain stores, the model grocery, fair, home-owned stores, handy cash grocery, were all advertising Kellogg's Corn Flakes at one time or another. The fair was the one who actually advertised the most often for Kellogg's Corn Flakes. And it drops, well, it's 21 cents for 2 packages on August 4th, 1929, and then it drops to 17 cents in October of 1933, which is a decline of about 19%. But if I measured it from its highest price in early 1930, then it would be a decline of about 26%. This is a typical advertisement for the fair. The fair is sort of like a Walmart because it carried a lot of things that beyond groceries. They carried sewing materials and notions and a variety, clothing and a variety of other things. But they always ran their grocery ads separate from their ads for the rest of the store. And so I was able to tease out a good amount of information there. This one's from the National Tea Company. And it first advertised Kellogg's Corn Flakes on the 22nd of January in 1930 at 21 cents for 2 packages. By October of 33, it was down to 19 cents. It still shows a pattern that's sort of similarly up and down, not just one price and not just a trailing down the scale as the coffee and the flour had done. Here's AMP's. It also confirms that the prices bounce around a bit more than they do in the more straightforward commodities. Its first advertised price was 25 cents in April of 1930, and it's down to 19 in May of 32 before going back up to 20. So that's kind of what's going on there. All of these indicate, like I said, basically that there is no straightforward trajectory here. Presumably the price of corn is going down. In fact, I know it is because I looked at the Fred data. I didn't put it in here, but I did look at it. But the price of the packaged flake is not necessarily going down in the same way. So now switching to the Van Camp's pork and beans. They were usually sold in a 16-ounce can. And sometimes they were sold in lots, 3-4, 5-4, 8-4. And so I basically divided by however that number was to get it down to 1 because there was no consistent, how many 4 in the data. This particular one is from Red Owl, and as you can see, months passed without pork and beans, or at least the Van Camp's version of pork and beans, getting mentioned in their ads. The entire difference ranged from just over 8 cents per can in July 31st, 1929 to just over 4 cents in December of 1933. And it basically, much of the time, was right at 5 cents in 1932 and 1933. Approximately, this is a drop of about 40%, ranging to 50%. If you use the 5 cents, it's more like 40%. This is from the fair. It didn't run any ads for Van Camp's pork and beans until June 1, 1932, when it was selling at 5 cents. This chart looks a little different since it is all from 1932 and 1933 instead of spread out over the number of years. But most of the time you can see it's 5 cents, and when it's not 5 cents, it's between there and 0.45. So it's a pretty narrow range in terms of what they're doing, and that difference is only 9%. But of course, it didn't start till 32. And then this one is from Model Grocery. It shows a pattern similar to the Red Owl, but its prices never went quite as low as the other ones did. It started off with the little over 8 cents, 8.33 cents. And in 1930, which is the same price that Red Owl had advertised almost a year before. and it dropped to 6.25 cents by August of 1931, and then went back to 5 cents by February of 1932. It never went below that 5-cent mark again, and then it finished at 5.75 cents in July of 1933. So if I was measuring from its high to its low, it would be about 40% like red owl. Let's see, what have I got here? P&G. Soup, there it is. There we are. Sorry, I lost my place. I wanted at least one non-food item in the list, and I chose this one. There were other white naphtha bars that were often in the same price range, but I chose this one because I understood what it was. And usually it was sold either at 5 bars for or 10 bars for, but sometimes it was 7 bars for. So again, for simplicity's sake, I just did price per bar. And there were 8 retailers who advertised this product between 1929 and 1933. Of those, the prices ranged from a high of 4.2 cents, and that was at Home Owned in May of 1929, to a low of 2.3 cents at Red Owl in December of 1933. So based on that, I could assert that prices dropped by 45%, but that would underestimate the fluctuations that occurred. So here is Home Owned stores, and just based on it, going from the beginning in May of 1929 to December of 1933, it's a decline of about 29%. And the trend looks largely downward, not huge ups and downs. Model grocery looks a little bit different, in part because of this outlier in late 1930 when it had gone up some. But again, overall, it's a decline of almost 37% from the opening price and the last one that I have information for. National Tea, which is the one that advertised it most frequently, gives the most information on how complex the pricing on this product was. It ran more ads than any of the others. Its sale price was consistently below 3.5 cents as early as May of 1930. It remained below 2.5 cents in its last listing in December 13th, 1933. And for a long period, you can see it was pretty much at the same price, but then it would suddenly drop, or it would suddenly jump up for reasons that I can't quite determine from the ads. And there's no Fred data that's going to help me. It's all conglomerated with detergents and washing things, and it just doesn't stick out in the same way that would allow me to get to that data. So basically, though, if I calculate from highest to lowest on National Tea, the decline would be roughly 44%. But if I use the figures from the earliest advertised date to the last advertised date, it would be 39%. So that's 5 percentage points difference, perhaps enough to be significant. This AMP also was pretty regular at advertising it, and its scatter chart looks somewhat similar to the National Tea one. Its lowest price was in February and April of 1933, when it was 2.3 cents, although the very next week it jumped to 2.5 cents. Its most expensive was 3.5 in the summer of 1930. Based on lowest price offered and highest price charged, the decline would be over 34%. So that brings up the meat product as the last piece of this. Although limiting myself just to beef roast for purposes of the papers, it's clear to me that meat product prices were going down regardless of what cut it was, or whether it was chickens or pork or beef. I just needed to choose something to generate the charts that would make sense of it for me. The person that advertised beef roast the most was J.F. Adams, Meat Market and Grocery. Its ads usually included beef roast as one of the items, and it usually advertised every week. The prices started on February 6, 1929 at 20 cents, rose to their highest 1929 level in March when the cost was 24 cents a pound. For most of the year, however, in 1929 it was 20 cents a pound, and that was also the price in early 1930. In March of 30 and most of April it was 19 cents a pound, but then it went up to 21 cents a pound on April 30th. Then it fell back to 19 cents a pound in late May, and then to 17 cents a pound in late June. For 1 week in July, sold for 13 cents a pound before stabilizing at 15 cents for the remainder of the year. In 1931, 13 cents on April 1st. It ended the year on 9 cents a pound on December the 16th, 1931. Although in between there, the price had briefly risen to 18 cents in May. And then in 1932, there was still downward pressure. It reached 7 cents on June 22nd, which is the last date in 1932 this product was advertised. In 1933, it was first advertised at 9 cents a pound on June 14th, which is almost a year later. And then it dropped to 7 cents 2 weeks later, and much of the rest of the year it was at 7 cents. But right at the end of the year, starting on December 6th, it stabilized at 8 cents. So measuring from the high in 1929 to the lowest in 1933, that's a 71% decline. But if I just look at the first advertised date and the last advertised date, that's more like 40%. The national data from the Federal Reserve Bank, which shows wholesale index of meats, it doesn't just single out beef, but meats for the United States, also shows a pretty steep increase, but it also shows those little jagged rises for a few weeks at a time, which I think is part of what I'm seeing in the J.F. Adams pricing. The second most frequent advertiser of beef roast was the Wittis meat market. And at times there were different spellings of this market in the advertisements in the newspaper, and at this point I'm not really sure which way it's supposed to be. But his prices do show a trend that's pretty similar to Adams. In April of 1929, he was at 22 cents a pound. In November of that year, he was at 20 cents. In February of 30, it rose again to 22 cents, and that was the highest recorded for him. And then it's down to 12 cents by August of 1930, before going back to 14 cents in October of that year. In 31, it began at 9 cents in February, drifted up to 10 cents in October, but finished the year at 8 cents in December. And it remained at that 8 cent price for most of 1932. There was one time it was 10 cents. And he ended 1933 at 8 cents as well, although it did go as low as 6 cents on October 18th. So taking in the overall trend, looking at Wittis, prices for beef roast declined nearly 64%, although if you looked at the highest and lowest offered, it would have been 73%. Zegelman, or Ziegelman probably, sanitary meat market, was associated with the Handy Cash Grocery. Sometimes they ran ads together and sometimes they didn't. There were no advertised prices in 1929 or 1930, and the business closed in October of 1931. In between, when it did advertise, the prices on beef roast actually rose from 11 cents in February of 31 to 15 cents in June of 31, which reflects the same sort of spike seen in Adams and the federal data. Central Market, which opened soon after Ziegelman's closed, started with an advertised price of 10 cents a pound for beef roast, dropped to 8 cents in early December of 1931, and then raised it to 11 cents in January 32 before going down to 8 cents. Whatever measure you want to use, its prices vary the least. However, because they're not advertising in 1930 and 1929, they didn't exist as a business in 1930 and 1929, it's difficult to know if their data would have been any different if they'd been there the whole time. Something that is a little bit interesting, the Ziegelman's Sanitary Meat Market and Handy Cash Market, which closed in October of 1931, there was absolutely no hint in the newspaper that they were experiencing any difficulties until October 7th, when the market, the Candy Cash Market, abruptly announced that it was closing at a sacrifice because a lease on the building has changed hands. 2 weeks later, Central Market ran an ad stating it was opening on Friday, October 23rd, as a meat market which will handle at all times only the best grades of meats, fish, and poultry, which it thought Rice Lake then lacked. I'm a little tempted to conclude that the operators of Central Market might have had something to do with the building lease that shut the Handy Market and Ziegelman's down, but I can't prove it just from the data in the newspaper, and I haven't found other sources that would corroborate that yet. There's something else interesting happening in that week in between the October 7th date that Handy said we're closing and the October 21st date that Central says we're opening. In that week in between, Wittis ran an ad listing the prices of 5 meat products. He had not run any ads since February 11th, 1931. So we're talking 8 months here, basically. Between that October 14th date and the end of the year, he advertised 4 more times, and in 1932, he advertised at least 8 more times, which was a greater rate of advertising beef roast over those 16 months than either J.F. Adams or the Central Market. From that, I might conclude that Wittis regarded the Central Market as a greater threat than either Adams or the now defunct Ziegelman's. However, that could be premature because Central Market was advertising frequently but was more focused on pork products than it was on beef ones. And this shows an ad from April of 1932, actually 3 ads, one for each of them. J.F. Adams, and then Central Market on top of Wittis Market. Beef roast was 8 cents at Wittis. But Central didn't say anything about it. It just has pork roast, pork sausage, sugar-cured hams, etc. And this is fairly typical. I mean, normally if they ran an ad that had beef in it, it was for the hamburger. But J.F. Adams, like almost always, did have beef roast in his list at 9 cents. They all ran on the same page, by the way, in the newspaper. Okay. So overall, what does this tell us about prices in groceries? First of all, they do decline significantly between January of 1930 and the end of 1932. They don't move in lockstep depending on what item you're looking at. Second, the grocers are using a lot of different tactics to remain competitive, but they're not always managing it. And surprisingly, I was surprised that Central Market as a new business would open in that kind of business climate. But they did and seemed to make a success of it. So basically, this reconfirms what we know about depressions, that is what historians know about depressions, which is those who still get paychecks can survive because prices of the goods you really need go down. And that included for everyone. So I'm going to stop.
Let's open up for questions.
Yes, Tim?
The zooming of the wheat prices, was that the Dust Bowl? Was that due to the...
I'm assuming so. I haven't actually looked at what's going on in North and South Dakota at that point, but that would have been the crux of it. Western Minnesota, North, South Dakota, that's where most of the wheat was being grown that would have affected those prices. And the Dust Bowl does start
I think there might be institutional factors too with the Agricultural Adjustment Act. of 1930.
And that's the
I
other
don't know, but
possibility.
that's,
Yeah.
Their government adopted policies to try to inflate prices after Roosevelt comes in.
Right.
I was going to ask, you started to get at this, I mean, how much difference was there between the different markets in terms of prices? Did they seem to be competitive? Did they
Yeah.
you kind of showed this, but
Yeah. They seem to be competitive. They seem to be paying attention to what one another is doing. If it was rare that you got the same product that I was looking at in more than one or two or three markets on the same day, unless it was with the home-owned stores, because the home-owned stores always had 5 items that they advertised, and all the home-owned stores ran those specials.
Yeah.
And then Model Grocery would also advertise other things. But it looks like they are. I mean, things like Wesson Oil. One week will be 23 here and 21 there, and then the next week it's 21 here, and these people aren't saying what they're doing.
So there's not one store that's consistently cheaper or more expensive?
Does not seem to be. Yeah, not even the chains are consistently and always cheaper. Especially if you look at all the price data as opposed to just these products. Yeah.
I know you were looking at these specific products, but did you notice differences in just overall what was being advertised in those years for the grocery?
Well, there's some seasonal things, of course, but the vegetables and fruits are much more seasonal than they are now. Also seasonal in the sense of Thanksgiving and Christmas. Get your holiday baking needs here, kinds of things. And similarly for Easter in the spring. Canning goods, get your canning goods in the late summer. Those kinds of things. Otherwise, no, they seem to be pretty much, A&P and only one other that I know of sold cigarettes. The rest of them don't seem to sell cigarettes. Alcohol is illegal, so they're not selling that. At least it's illegal into at least it's illegal into 33. But yeah, they're pretty much they're selling the same
Related to
stuff.
that, the volume of advertising, are they advertising more or less?
It seems to me that there's a significant decline of advertising in 1930 and early 1931. And the newspaper editors are every 4 to 6 weeks putting an editorial in saying, it's good business practice to keep advertising.
Yeah, I think it's very noticeable, or it was noticeable to me when I was reading the newspapers in the 30s, how much advertising declines.
Yeah.
For other things, for clothing, both in terms of size in particular.
Yeah.
There used to be these large ads.
Yeah,
for cars
J.C.
and
Penney
clothing.
would take up 3 columns all the way down the page,
Yeah.
and then they got smaller.
Exactly.
Yeah. Tim had a question, I think.
Just curious that you mentioned one of these places went out of business. It started with 16. Was there a little bit of depression here? How many made it to the end?
Well, I haven't looked all the way through to 1940, so that's still to do. Takes a little while to do all this data entry, Tim.
But in this time period, was there more than just the one that went down?
I'm assuming so, actually. There's one that actually seems to go down sometime between the middle of 1929 and the middle of 1930, but I can't find an announcement in the newspaper. Everything disappears, including the name on the list of home-owned stores. So I'm assuming it disappeared, but I don't have the evidence. But I would not be at all surprised if more of them close before the end of the decade. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is it possible to obtain regional per capita income data over the same time period to see what the trend was in purchasing power? See if the trends in prices reflected it or lagged, or what was motivating them, other than there was less, but in a quantitative sense?
Yeah.
Are they responding specifically to the local economy?
They are responding to the local economy. I don't know if I can get the regional data you were mentioning, but I can tell you the number of families that are on relief go up. The city council actually every week extends relief in this amount for this person or this family for X number of weeks. And so every city council meeting, there's these long lists of who's getting relief, and those lists just get longer and longer. By the fall of 1933, as the Civil Works Administration is beginning to get busy to try and hire people over the winter months, there were, I think, oh shoot, I wish I had this at hand. If I'm remembering correctly, there were more than 100 families in Rice Lake that were going to be receiving CWA jobs. And in Barron County as a whole, a few thousand. So yeah, I mean, there's distress. There's real distress. Okay, but I don't know. I don't know if I can get the regional income info.
Do you know if that density of grocery stores?
I think it was typical. I think it was typical. You had neighborhood stores, and people would walk to them and then walk home with their groceries, and only use the delivery services if they were ill or infirm or the weather was super nasty. Right. So you wouldn't, and some people had cars, of course, but there was not a bus service that went around the city of Rice Lake. There was Greyhound, went in and out of Rice Lake, but not around the city. And so if they don't own a car, then they're either dependent on getting a ride with a friend or walking. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, having observed the advertisements over this time period, undoubtedly there were fewer people with the financial means in the community, so competition would naturally go up. Did you find over time that the advertisements started to change in order to attract customers? In other words, you had at the beginning mentioned like delivery. Did you start to see more of an emphasis on gimmicks rather than prices at some point? Did you see a general rise in those trends?
No, actually I see gimmicks right from the beginning. Yeah, and I think a lot of those are aimed at people who do have cars and can go wherever they want, rather than the others. So those gimmicks are often on Saturdays, so they are looking to some extent for the farmers coming in from the countryside. So, you know, come to Northside Grocery and get a demonstration of Honor coffee and Honor cookies. So let's go have some free cookies and coffee and look around the store while we're there, is kind of what's going on there. And the Chronotype was delivered by mail into the rural areas around, so.
And so are you looking at clippings, or are you looking at microfilm, or what? How
Originally I was looking at microfilm, which the public library in Rice Lake owns. Recently, last year before, I had enough professional development money that I was able to buy a searchable PDF version from the Wisconsin Historical Society. They'll create these for you, but you have to pay for them. So I now have it all on a fancy flash drive, and I've downloaded it onto a couple of computers. Yeah, and so I'm using that. It means I can go back and look at whatever I want whenever I want. You know, if I'm going, wait, is that the right page number? Because it just doesn't seem right. Normally that would be the page for editorials. Then I can go back and check it. It makes it much easier than having to work at the library. Yeah, the ads don't always come up as searchable, but if I'm looking for, like, did this grocer go out of business in a regular article, I can definitely find it that way. Yeah. Yeah. So, are we done? We've run over our time.
I just wanted to comment that sanitary meat market is such an awesome name.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah, I loved that.
Thanks, Sue, for her presentation.
Thank you all again for being here.